Okay, we're back. What we're talking about today is migration in geography. And one thing you can say about people in general is, humanity. We are always on the move, like one place to another, moving from one place to another. Like I said, it's actually kind of rare we stay in one place for any significant period of time. The paleontologist once found one of the earliest known hand tools, basically just a rock, a little edge of rock with a sharp edge chunk, uh, sharp edge, sharp chunk taken out of it. And of course, the question is, this is about 1 million years ago. How do we know that was actually used as a tool? It was found not far from a body, but how do we know that particular rock was a tool? Because that rock was about 100 miles from where it originated. And that guy had taken that little rock as a tool and carried it for 100 miles, at least. For the domestication of agriculture, it's very common for people to migrate over large distances, the hunter-gatherer cultures of the ancient world. But once agriculture really kind of came in place, people didn't have to go to the ends of the earth to get their next meal. They could basically stay in one area, one village or one settlement or one farmstead, and they could um, take care of all their needs, food, clothing, and shelter, in one area. So for the next few thousand years, it's very common for people not to go more than 30 or 50 miles from the spot they were born their entire lives. People tend to, so humanity does the opposite. And based on diet, um, instead of wandering everywhere, we stay in one place. But then as technology progressed and trading networks expanded, people started moving outward again. Uh, moving to the far corners of the earth over and over again, particularly once the New World was discovered. Now, the Native Americans had arrived thousands of years before, but for the Europeans, this is a brand new find. They had no idea North America or South America even existed. So people started moving, just a few at first, but eventually tens of millions of people migrating from Europe to the Americas, and colonization. People moved from Europe to Africa, and from Africa to the Americas and to Europe, and really all over the globe. The United States is an immigrant nation in so many ways. Everyone in the United States today is either an immigrant or the descendant of immigrants. Because even to this day, there's still millions of people trying to reach to the United States because they still see America as a land of opportunity where the streets are still paved with gold. Now, several ideas here of migration. Or migration is basically defined as a shift of the people from one area to another. Very basic, very simple. Immigration with an I is to move into. Immigration with an E, out of. Now, in all this, there's several different ideas. Among them, uh, spatial interaction. Spatial interaction. And that is the interdependence between geographic areas among the movement of people, goods, ideas, and diseases, even. How these spaces interact with each other. For example, you go to the grocery store. There are certain brands, certain products you see and you're used to. But you go to other areas and those brands may not be present because your favorite product may be a regional brand, only available here in Arkansas and a few other states. Think of the Slim Chickens restaurant. It's popular here in El Dorado. It's a Fayetteville-based company. But move too much further outside of Arkansas or Arkansas and northern Louisiana, you're not going to find any, at least not yet. Same thing with Walmart. They started in Bentonville. For the first 20 years, basically, they're in you can only find them just in the states surrounding Arkansas. By the 1990s, though, they're everywhere. Spatial interaction. Movement of disease. We talked about this a lot during the pandemic. Is how diseases spread. Pathology, as it's called. And a lot of that is a result of spatial interaction. Well, depending on what disease it is, now it's spread, that defines the spatial interaction. Something like, say, COVID, you get in your close proximity to people because it's airborne. So it tended to be in higher concentrations in areas where there are a lot of people. Movement of people. It's not just immigration, but also such things as traffic. Understanding how different areas, particularly like suburban areas, interact with the central city, that is an important part of geography. It's an important part of planning, understanding how people are moving from one area to another, to and from work or to and from some important cultural center, like how can they get to see the Cowboys play in the Dallas area, how easily can they get there? Spatial interaction. And all this, you get the idea of distance decay. The idea that as you move farther away, the influence kind of dies out. Decline of an activity, function, or amount of interaction with the increasing distance from the source. Distance decay. One simple example of this would be broadcast TV and radio stations. Here in South Arkansas, watch the news, turn to Channel 8, CBS affiliate, and you watch it for years. You know all the people on the newscasts, you know all the commercials, you know all the references to all the different businesses that are being advertised. But you move further out of this area, out of the broadcast range, and no one's quite sure where these businesses are or who these people are on this newscast because they can't get these stations. Go over to Dallas, you turn to Channel 8, what do you see? An ABC affiliate. Completely different programs, completely different advertisers, completely different references to a wholly different geographic area. Or even Channel 10. Everyone knows what it is here in El Dorado, but go to Dallas, there isn't a Channel 10. But go to Sherman on the Texas-Oklahoma border, there is a Channel 10. Distance decay. Um, now, for example, you're watching a broadcast station in New York City. Everybody knows what you're talking about, but to get further out, and the local news in New York City, just no one understands the references. No one understands the significance of it. Why is some city council race in New York City important when you're sitting there in, say, Philadelphia? Uh, why would the Live at 5 broadcast on NBC4 be important to someone sitting in Philadelphia when they don't even have a Channel 4 there? Distance decay. Or even, let's say, favoritism of certain sports teams. I grew up in Texas. You grow up in Texas, it's all about the Cowboys. But growing up in Texas, you don't realize once you move out of Texas how much people really hate Texas outside of that state. So you move across the state line into Louisiana. It's no longer about the Cowboys, it's all about the Saints. But you move out a little bit further from New Orleans and say Alabama and Georgia, it's all about the Falcons all of a sudden. Distance decay. You're further out from an area, so its influence is less because there's another influence that's stronger in that area. Also, the idea here, critical distance. This is beyond which cost, effort, means, and perception play on um, overriding roles and willingness to travel. It's just simply, and or it's just simply too far to go. Dallas is 5 hours away. That's uh, that's a long drive, but it's doable in the afternoon or something. So um, people don't really think too much about. Okay, I need to go to Dallas. I go to Dallas, or especially out here in kind of a rural area like here in South Arkansas. I think, okay, go to Little Rock. That's a 2 hour drive, but we consider that a reasonable distance in this area because whatever we need is probably going to be in Little Rock. But go out a little further. Certain areas we consider to be just kind of too far out to be convenient to reach. For example, New Orleans is a 7 hour drive away. St. Louis is an 8 hour drive away. But we consider St. Louis to be too far out usually because there just isn't as much that we need there that we can't get, say, someplace close, like, say, Little Rock or Memphis or even Dallas, beyond that 5 hour radius. And say St. Louis, it has kind of a bad reputation these days, but not a bad city really. But again, perception's playing on that. Or even say, go back to the example of New York City. City, 8 million people in an area the size of Union County. New York has a horrible reputation here in the South. It's crowded, crime-ridden, expensive. Um, like I said, just the idea of New York City is kind of grates on some people down here, especially in a wide open rural area. So perception plays on that. Even though there's a lot of things you can do in New York City, you can do anything in the world there. The perception of it really kind of sours a lot of people on wanting to travel up there. Plus cost, effort, and distance. It's an airplane flight of a few hours, but it's a drive of a couple of days. Critical distance. Activity space. This is the area with which we move freely, amid our own regular activities. Is what's the area of the space we're used to? Like I say, we live in El Dorado, so that's our activity spaces, basically in and around town. Anywhere, say, between here and Magnolia, maybe, if that, or between here and Parker's Chapel. It's just the area we just tend to inhabit the most. And territoriality. You live in an area a long period of time, sometimes you develop a sense of ownership over neighborhood, over city. Um, Even though, well, your hometown may not seem like much to anybody else, it may still have a very special place in your own heart. A lot of people are like that with the church they grew up in or a school they went to. The sense of territoriality, sense of ownership, that they're part of it, can become very defensive about it. So territoriality in geographic terms means your emotional attachment to an area, your sense of ownership of an area. Example, a lot of people traveling overseas that someone in another country may ask where you're from. Texans always say, I'm from Texas. They tend to say that with a lot of pride. But in a lot of people from a lot of other states just simply say, I'm from the U.S. Not they have necessarily, they meant Texas is something kind of built into the culture. It has a lot more emotional attachment to it. Texas ideas, all things Texas, everything's bigger and better. That's drilled into you from the time you're a small kid. Like I say, if you have a lot of special memories of a place, that can kind of increase your emotional attachment to it. My grandfather was a rancher in Archer County, Texas. Um, my grandma liked to go out and travel a little bit, but my grandfather said he hadn't seen all Archer County, he wants to see it. And Hall's life is blood, sweat, and toil into the land. He grew very close to it. It's a place he was very proud of. Now, back to migration in general, especially over a large scale, and the shift of people from one area to another. There are a lot of factors that go into that. A lot of different kinds of migration. Now, migration can take place voluntarily or under coercion, governmental or economic. They call that reluctant migration, or by force, involuntary migration. Voluntary migration, reluctant migration, and voluntary migration. Voluntary, you want to move on your own, just because sense of adventure. You want to see someplace different. You want to live someplace different. Um, yeah, most people they'll probably stay pretty close to their hometown most of their lives, but a lot of them say once they have the opportunity, like the day they graduate high school, next morning they pack up the car and move across the country. Some people do that. Again, voluntary migration, just want to see and do something different. Nothing wrong with that. But other people move for other reasons. Like I said, coercion. Um, suppose you've said something that's not received well by the government, and they make it very clear that, maybe it's time for you to leave that country. That's involuntary reluctant migration or economic. You don't want to leave, but you need to get a better job somewhere else. You need to be able to support yourself. So my great grandfather was born in a little town in northeast Arkansas, Bowdoin, Arkansas. Um, Tiny little farm town. All out there. So they farmed out there for decades by that point, by the early 1900s. But beyond the farm, there just wasn't a whole lot more to do. So, economic migration. He got up and he moved. First to St. Louis, and he came back, and then bought a farm in Oklahoma, and another one in Texas. Uh, like I said, my great grandparents on the other side, kind of the same way. My great grandmother was born outside of Paris, Texas. Cotton farmers. Uh, and during the Great Depression, there just weren't a lot of jobs or opportunities, but my great grandfather got a job working in the oil fields in Wichita Falls, Texas. So they moved about 100 miles west to Wichita Falls, and they lived there the rest of their lives. Economic migration. Or you think about so many people moving into the United States today from overseas. It's economic. I mean, think about it. If you could do the same job and make 5 or 10 times as much money, and all you have to do is move 500 or 1,000 miles, would you do it? Yeah, probably would. Especially when you got a wife and kids to feed. And so many people who immigrated to the United States in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s, it's the same thing. They were looking for work. In a lot of large cities in Texas and across the Southwest, you'll see groups of migrants who lining up for work as day laborers. And so they got a lot of people with construction crews and everything else. They'll pick up a few guys, help them, pay them that day for whatever it is they need. And these guys line up for these jobs. A lot of them just got to the United States the night before. So they came here, first thing they want to do is find a job, go to work. And that reluctant migration because they needed work. They just couldn't do well there. They just couldn't get by in their own country anymore. Or by force. Yeah, there have been a lot of instances in history where some dictator decides he doesn't like one little group of people, religious or ethnic group, and decides at gunpoint kick them out of the country. Or voluntarily just, this is something very common in Soviet Russia, was they didn't like this one particular group of people, so they moved them out and moved loyal Russians in. The mayoral vote lift in 1980, Fidel Castro, the dictator of Cuba, told people, kicked out a bunch of people out of Cuba, basically criminals and people in asylums, just to basically get out. And so they came to the United States by the thousands. Now, where people go is a matter of what's called push and pull factors. What pushes people away and what pulls them toward it. So migration patterns, like I said, they're actually fairly predictable. Example, take immigrants from Mexico and other parts of Latin America, Central America. They don't just go to random places in the United States. They go to very specific areas. Usually what happens is a couple people from one area go to an area. They write back home telling you how great it is. A couple other people decide, oh, they want a piece of all this too. So they start coming up and coming to this area because somebody you might know or somebody speaks the same language or uh, try to find someone who can show them the ropes, how to get by in America. And so after a while, you have these very large immigrant communities of people from a very specific area. For example, in Texas, it's mostly immigrants from areas like Sonora, Durango, Michoacan, a couple different Mexican states. California, mostly immigrants from Baja, California, so on and so forth. All coming from very specific areas, going to specific areas. Now, are there exceptions? Of course there are, but generally it follows those patterns. Uh, Example, taking a look at the migration patterns, say, going from Mexico to the United States, minimum wage in Mexico is $2 an hour. But in the United States, you can make $6, $7 an hour for the same job. So it makes economic sense to go there. Or go from Guatemala to Mexico. Guatemala, minimum wage is about 25 cents an hour. They make $2 an hour in Mexico. 8 times the salary just for doing the same job. And these are the decisions that people have to think about when they are moving from one country to another. Economics. Where can I get the best deal? What's best for me and my family? And then you get the term migration field. An area that dominates a locale's in-migration, out-migration patterns. In different types of migration. For example, channelized migration. Channelized migration, which is just the tendency of a group to migrate to a specific area, like we just talked about. Another example would be the Mormons going to Utah in the 1840s. Like I said, Latter-day Saints Church decided they wanted to set up shop in Utah, and they encouraged everyone, all the other Mormons, to move out to Utah with them. They did. Scandinavians going to Minnesota and Wisconsin, and the Dakotas, in very specific areas. Or World War I, moving African Americans from the deep south up to factory jobs in northern cities. And then you have the phenomenon of return migration and counter migration. Not everybody stays. It's the general return of immigrants to an area they left, again for a variety of reasons. Be because of family attachment, or the job was over, or decide, you know what, they just want to go home. They like that spot better. One example would be a very famous American immigrant, Andrew Carnegie, big steel magnate, one of the richest men in the world. Came to the United States from Scotland as a young boy, barely a dime to his name. Makes a fortune in the United States. Boy, he retires, what does he do? Goes back to Scotland. Not because he disliked the United States, but just because he could go back and forth and he had some fond memories of Scotland. And in general, about 25% of migrants will return back to the country of origin. And you have a lot of what they call seasonal migration. You have a lot of migrant workers who come from Mexico and they come into the United States as farm laborers. Make their money going from one farm to another, picking the crops and the jobs. Excuse me. When the job's done, they go back home. That's simple. Then you have the idea of hierarchical migration. Tendency for individuals and domestic migration move from small areas to larger ones, or from less improved areas to more improved ones, moving from country to town or town to suburb or country to a big city. Hierarchical migration. A lot of people growing up in small towns, they want to leave the small town and go to the excitement of a big city, where there's so much more to do, so many more opportunities, a lot more jobs available, so they want to leave this area. There are a lot of people who leave El Dorado for Dallas because it's a bigger city, there are more jobs available, and just aren't as many factors keeping people in El Dorado as are pulling people toward Dallas. Because one thing about the Dallas area is there's always something to do. There's always something to see. There's always somewhere to go. Like I said, if things aren't going well at one job, well, you know what, you can pick up and move to the next suburb over, or you can get another job somewhere else fairly easily. Millions of people living there, a lot of jobs available, a lot of opportunities. Sometimes a lot of people move away for college. That's an example of hierarchical migration. Going from some small town somewhere to a city with a large university. I went to the University of Texas. 50,000 students there now. More than this entire county. And there are a lot of people from little towns dotting all over Texas and across the rest of the country. They moved to Austin because it's a big city, a lot of excitement, it's a great university, great opportunity, and there simply is more of a pull to Austin than a force keeping them in, say, Seymour, Texas, or Durant, Oklahoma. Now, of course, it doesn't always work like this. There's a tendency, people tend to move more toward larger cities. But there are plenty of people who get tired of the rat race of the city and want to move out to the suburbs or out to the country. Because bigger space, quieter, it's like having a big old spread to look at miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles of nothing. And they kind of like that. But again, the push-pull factors, that's always an important thing. It's pushing you toward an area or it's pulling you. Pushing you away from an area or it's pulling you toward another area. Like I said, we talked about a lot of education opportunities. That's a pull factor. Job opportunities, that's a pull factor. Social outlets and entertainment opportunities, that's a pull factor. Push factor can be just grew up in a small town, you never really fit in. So there's nothing there to keep you, you want to leave. Or the factory your family worked at for years and years is shutting down, so you have to leave to find work somewhere else. That's a push factor, and so forth. So yeah, things like cultural amenities, cultural economic uncertainties, political incentives, all fit into push and pull factors in migration.